Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here. I do this pretty frequently all throughout the world. This is a fighting clinic that I've been doing for close to 15 years now. And this lecture that I start with in the morning is exactly the same lecture that I've been doing for all that time. And the reason it's exactly the same thing is because you've either not heard this before, or if you have heard it, you missed something that was in there the last time. And the biggest reason for missing something like that is just you weren't ready for that particular chunk of it. So I know Zippy's been to class before, so he's gonna pick up on something that he missed out last time. And so if anybody's been to class, or if you've seen the video that I've got, there's a couple out there from the class I did in Atlanta a few years ago, and Montier and other places. So if you've seen that, you've listened to those, you kind of have a little bit of heads up on what we're about to do. But if you haven't, that's all right, because I'm going to go over it all again. So let me first start with a little bit of what this is and what this is not. Okay, we're going to start with some instruction on training methodology, and then we're going to talk about some universal principles of combat. I've only got a weekend here. There's only so much I can do in one weekend to fix all of your problems. And that's not really my intent. I'm not here to fix everything. I'm here to give you the tools that you need to be able to fix these things for yourself, and to give you a good basis for foundation for what training is and how training happens, so that you can create a training program for yourself at your local practices, right? I'm not here to teach you my fighting style, because fighting style is very personal, very subjective. There is no master style in our sport or in any martial arts. There are only master practitioners and each of those styles that you're going to have, again, it is very personal, and your fighting style is going to be a product of your life experiences in and outside the SCA. If you have a military background, or if you have a martial arts background, or any other sports background, all of those things that you've done in other disciplines are going to contribute to what your fighting style is going to be. So I'm not here to teach you my style necessarily, although when we talk about universal principles of combat, those are things that I focus very heavily on, but they are, as I say, universal. These are not sword and shield techniques. These are not heavy weapons techniques. This isn't even fighting or SCA combat techniques. These are universal principles of combat, and I'll get into more of that later. But fighting style is, again, very, very specific, very personal, very subjective. You can say, you can make all kinds of arguments about which style is better or not, but I'm not really here to teach you my style necessarily, because I don't want just copies of me anyway, right? Because that's just boring. But the training methodology that I teach, that in itself is absolutely proven, and I've got a large sampling that suggests that the way that we look at training and teaching somebody how to do something, that is something that is absolutely proven, and I really want you to focus on that. When we're comparing training methodology versus fighting style, I am much less concerned about what you are learning as I am about how you are learning it. Because when you put a better method behind how you're learning things, you're going to find that whatever it is that you are being taught is just that much easier to learn. Okay, so that's a little bit about what this is and what it's not. Also, I do not believe in the one true way. I have, the methods that I use work for a lot of people. If you are going to put an honest effort into the techniques and methods that I'm trying to get across to you, if you're going to try that and it doesn't work, I will make a similar effort to find something that does work for you. I've done a lot of this now, so if a concept is just not getting through to you, I've got more and more analogies that we can come up with to get this concept through to you, and Typically, every time I do class like this, there's somebody that just doesn't get it, so I have to come up with another analogy for exactly the same concept, and that just goes in my little Rolodex of how we get information across to people, so I'm good with that too. So I will take as much time within reason as necessary to get these concepts across to you. But if it doesn't work, if you're gonna hear it from somebody else, that's fine too. A lot of times when I go and teach classes, and I always love having the Dukes sitting in the back of the class, nodding their head, going, "Yeah, that's what I've been saying." And
nobody listens to me.
And invariably, I also get those Dukes to tell me, it's like, "Well, you're not telling them anything that we're not telling them." Like, yeah, I know, but I'm just saying it in a different way. I'm saying it in a way that happens to get across to a lot of people. In the book, The Tao of Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee, which was written after he had passed away, one of the authors in the prologue of the book said that Bruce had always said that there's nothing new in this book. Likewise, there is nothing that I'm going to tell you that has not existed for literally hundreds of years. I'm just presenting it in a way that is comfortable for me, and again, that apparently gets across to people in ways that they can understand. But I'm not giving you any technique that is uniquely my own, that is proprietary information that I came up with my own because I'm just some sort of genius. Okay? All of these things have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we're just going to present it to you in a different way that perhaps will get through to you. Does that make sense? So, any questions so far? All right. So, training methodology. Okay. For the longest time in our sport, for easily the first 40 years of our sport, we were teaching our martial art completely wrong. The primary training methodology that we had for the longest time in this sport was what I refer to as the smash and bash training methodology. Some of you may have heard it referred to as the pain management training methodology. Love them and leave them training methodology. There's any number of names for this, and essentially the theory is you put somebody in armor, you send them out on the field, they fight, and they somehow magically glean the information from the experience. Okay? That was, that's kind of how my training started off. But I was kind of also a beneficiary of a time in our sport where we really started training better. And by the way, I was inspired to a guy that you guys are probably not familiar with. You probably haven't heard of him, Brian Terragon.
No, never heard of him.
Never heard of him. He's a gentleman of some modest renown, but Brian and a number of others were kind of at the forefront of a revolution in our sport that was the beginning of actually teaching people how to do things. Because I got some pretty good instruction from Brian, because I was not athletically gifted. I was not, just some natural prodigy that just, my greatest strength was a lot of ignorance. Brian, when he was king of 80 belt coming out of Penzic, and he said, "Just go fight these guys." And I'm like, "Oh, yes, sir." And I didn't know enough to say, well, I don't want to fight that guy because he's just going to kick my ass. And well, who is he? And what king is he king of? I never had any of that. Brian said, "Go fight somebody." I just went to fight him. But yeah, for the longest time, it was just you put them in armor, you send them out on the field, and they're just they'll just get it. They'll just pick it up. And for people that have other athletic backgrounds or martial arts backgrounds, then that's something that worked for them. But that's not something that doesn't work for everybody. And that was, and it's still happening today. And honestly, I say without a great deal of ego that this is the one thing about our sport that I am trying to change, is how we teach this, so that we can teach things better, so that with having better training methodology, I'm finding that our sport becomes more accessible to a wider range of individuals that are not necessarily gifted with athletic backgrounds. And that means that the key indicator of success in our sport, when you have a better training methodology, the key success factor becomes effort. So I'm not saying that we're taking people that aren't putting in a lot of work and that they're just gonna magically be better fighters. But the people that are willing to put in the right amount of work can be successful in our sport. And I mean be wildly successful in our sport. And you don't have to come to this sport with a natural set of skills to begin with. Does that make sense? So that's the way we've been doing it, and I realized that some time ago that it's just a horribly inefficient model for actually teaching somebody how to do something. So the training methodology that I'm using is what I refer to as isolating and eliminating, okay? We're gonna isolate and eliminate your deficiencies. We're going to find out what is wrong with your fight. We're gonna pinpoint a very specific part of the fight that is deficient, and we are going to walk you through training and drills and walkthroughs and actual instruction on how to fix those things. So we're gonna find out what is wrong with your fight. We're gonna isolate your deficiencies. And you have to understand that when I talk about this, I am working under the assumption that there is always a deficiency. There is always something wrong with your fight. There has to be. If there's not something wrong with your fight, then you are a perfect and complete fighter, and you don't need us anymore, and we don't need you, right? There's always something wrong, and it's, we'll find here in a minute that this training methodology is a life cycle. As you fix one thing, or as you fix several things, eventually you come back to one of the first things that you had to fix, and you refine that better, and you make that better. And that there's always something wrong, there's always something that can be improved on. And it is often going to be something that you had already made improvements on previously, okay? But we are always going to look at your deficiencies. And I don't say that, so I'm not here to tell you that you guys are just awful fighters and you gotta fix everything, right? But the reason that we focus on deficiencies is because the way people learn things, we learn more from our failures than we do our successes. Success we take as the natural order of things. You're supposed to get it right? And when you have a success, you often just kind of wash over that, and you just think that part of your skill set is complete. And clearly it's not, but we don't put as much focus on that, and we don't use that as the tool that we can when we recognize failure, okay? When you go into a fight and you lose that fight, there is a point of failure there, and you can identify what that failure is, and you can begin working on that. We learn more from our failures than we do our successes. That is a scientifically proven fact. Okay. So yeah, I'm not here to tell you guys are just all awful, but there's going to be something wrong, and we're going to isolate what that is, and then we're going to go through a series of steps to begin eliminating what those deficiencies are. Make sense? So I want you to understand that is a core concept of what I'm doing is isolating deficiencies and using a variety of evaluation tools to find out what those deficiencies are. And we're going to be focusing heavily on that. So if you think about, I'll get that in a second. So that's if I was going to do a bullet point description of what my training methodology is, that's it. Isolating and eliminating deficiencies. So the way that we're going to do that as far as eliminating those deficiencies is the learning process or the training process, okay? In any learning endeavor that we have, there's basically 3 phases of learning. There's training, there's practice, and there's evaluation, okay? The training is where you are taught how to do a thing. The practice is where you do that thing on your own to get better at that skill, and the evaluation is where you are tested to find out how well you have learned the information, okay? Training, practice, evaluation. This is the life cycle. This is the training process. This is the continuous loop that you're gonna be in for the rest of your life, hopefully, okay? Regardless of how many crowns you win, you're gonna be in this continuous life cycle. Training, practice, and evaluation, okay? So, training is where you are taught how to do a thing, okay? If we think about this as like a college math class, right? I I don't know about the rest of y'all, but when I finished my associate's degree, Math 1050 was the very last class that I finished. Because we all hate the math class, but it's gotta be done, right? So if you think about it, a college math class, training is where the instructor will put up on the board, or put an equation up on the board, and he will walk you through these steps on how to solve that equation, okay? This is where you are being taught how to do the thing, and the instructor is available for questions to clarify how that thing happens, right? And then you go home and you have homework that needs to be done. And in that homework, you typically will have access to the answers so that you can kind of check back and make sure that you are doing the steps correctly. You have access to the book where you can look back in the reference material to find out what steps you're missing. And you go through and you do that work on your own so that you can get better at the steps as they were taught, as you got in training. Does that make sense? Then you have an evaluation. So it's going to be a quiz or a midterm or then the finals, right? So week 1, you get this instruction, you go home and do the homework, you come back and you get a quiz. And on this quiz that you're going to get, when you get the answers back after it's been graded, you're going to look at the quiz you have. And when you look at the answers that are available to you, which are the questions that you're typically going to focus on when you get the results back? The ones you got wrong, right? And you know that. We all do that. You zero in on the one you got wrong, and you glance over the ones that you got right, and you just make some assumption that you got those right. You know, even though that probably at least 25% of the ones you got right at that point are probably just a guess anyway. But you don't focus on those because it doesn't provide you that stinging, burning sensation of failure, right? And so when you look at those problems that you got wrong, you know that that is a deficiency. And you look at that deficiency and you go over that problem, and then you go back to the training and you find out what was wrong about it and what step you missed in the equation. And you go back and you get more training on that thing. And then you go and you do more homework on that thing so that you can take this better instruction that you have and do it more until you can get it right. Or as they say, you know, amateurs do it until they get it right, and professionals do it until they can't get it wrong. And so you have that quiz, and then ideally, as you come to midterm, that type of problem comes around, and you have made enough improvement in that type of problem that you get it right on the next one. And you get it more right than you do the questions that you got right when you were just guessing. Does that make sense? Because you had to go through that process. And you had to have that failure, and then you had to correct that failure. And then, ideally, you get that midterm, and again, you're not gonna get all the questions right. So now you're revealing the next greatest deficiency. It's not that it wasn't a deficiency before, but now it's just it's the next greatest deficiency, right? You fixed the biggest problem that you had, and now this is still a problem, but now this is the next biggest problem. Does that make sense? And then it goes back to training, and then it goes back to practice, and it goes back to evaluation. And ideally, by the time you get to your finals, you've made enough improvement in the subject material that you're missing fewer and fewer questions that you previously gotten wrong. Does that make sense? So that's a real world analogy of what the training cycle is, to give you kind of a frame of reference for what we're looking at. Training, practice, and evaluation. And it is a constant cycle. And that's the process that we're going to use, because I mean that's not SCA combat. That's how people learn things. That's how people learn anything, right? Is there any questions about the basic concepts of that so far? Okay. So we're going to let's break this out a little bit more and give you some better examples of what each of these phases is going to look like in our training. Okay. So training for us is going to be any type of instruction. You know, it's you sitting at practice with your knight or somebody else that has more experience in whatever you're doing, going through, like I said, walkthroughs. You know, when I teach a class on pelt work, that is training. pelvic drills, footwork, anything that keeps you engaged in the process. So it's drills and walkthroughs, and this is an environment where typically you're not even going to be armored at all. This is the instruction phase. This is where we teach you how to do things, and we can do this, and we have to do this without the combat environment complicating things. Because there's a set of emotional baggage that comes along with actually being in combat, which is part of the problem with that smash and bash training methodology. There's so much emotional baggage that you have to deal with that you can't actually learn how to do the thing because you're concerned about, well, being hit with a stick, and there's a lot of science behind why that just doesn't work, right? So the training environment removes that emotional element. It removes the threat and the danger, so that we can focus on doing the actual technique and doing the actions correctly and teaching how to do those things, right? So that's training, and training is going to be anything that you can do to keep yourself engaged on a daily basis. So that could mean watching YouTube videos. It could mean reading. There's a variety of books out there on martial concepts. I mentioned the Tao Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee. One of my other favorites is the Book of Fighting Rings by Musashi. That's a period text from the 16th century. It's kind of my go-to Bible on fighting philosophy. There's countless books out there and anything that you can be doing that keeps you engaged is part of the training process where you're learning how to do these things. Make sense? So that's a basic rundown of training. It's gonna be a long day of talking. Gonna need some more vodka in that at some point. Okay, so training is where you get taught how to do the thing, and that can manifest itself in countless ways in our sport. Then practice. This is the great misconception of our sport, and this is where I think we mostly get things wrong in how we are teaching things. Practice typically is assumed to be you show up at fighter practice, you put on your armor, you fight all night long, and again, the magic happens, and you suddenly are just a better fighter. One of the problems that we have with practice in general is there's the concept of people who want to come to practice so they can be the king of practice. Where you get to thinking, yeah, I go to practice and I beat people up and I feel better about myself, and I've got to be a great fighter because I won all my fights. One of the things about isolating deficiencies and practice and being in the right mindset for actually learning our sport is you have to redefine your victory conditions. And this is another key concept that I preach a lot of. Redefining your victory conditions means what does it take for you to consider your fighting experience to have been a success? Because if the only measure of success that you are willing to accept is you, say, winning a tournament, well, you are going to be sorely disappointed on a majority of cases. And you're going to find that your experience fighting is not really all that enjoyable because nobody can win every tournament. That's just a fact. It just doesn't happen, right? And if the only measure you have is winning a tournament, if that's the only way that you can feel like you've had victory, you've had success, that's a short-term outlook at best. Because we learn more from our failures than we do our successes. If you know how many fights you have won in a given set of fights with an opponent when you're at practice, you're doing it wrong, right? So ours definitely is a sport. Make no mistake about this. This is a sport wherein success in our sport is determined by one single variable, and that's body count, right? You guys would not be listening to me standing up here talking about what a great fighter you can be if if I didn't have a body count to back that up, right? But it is the concern for wins and losses that is counterproductive to actually learning the sport. If you're concerned about how many fights you win versus how many fights you lose, you're focusing on the wrong part of it. Because you know that there's going to be failure, right? And that's the thing, is I'm not teaching a losing mentality. I'm not saying that it's okay for you to lose, right? Losing sucks. No two ways about that. I'm not even gonna bullshit you about that. Losing sucks. Winning is always better than losing. It feels good. Which is why when we get to practice, a lot of times we just stick with the thing that feels good. We do the fighting that is going to get us a greater percentage of kills and victories and wins because winning feels good. But that doesn't make you a better fighter. That just gets you better at the one thing you're already good at, right? Practice is where we go to get better at the things that we suck at, right? And you have to set your practice up so that you are putting yourself in a position where you are allowing yourself to fail. And so again, that focusing on the, trying to be the king of practice and trying to win all your fights, it is counterproductive to actually learning the sport. And so when we go to practice, we need to, one of the key things about the practice environment and the training environment in particular is we need to create a place, we need to make our little safe space. We need to create an environment where it is okay and it is safe for you to fail, okay? When you're at practice and you are trying to get better at the things that you suck at, anytime you make changes to your fight and anytime you are doing something that is uncomfortable, that is a new skill set for you, there is going to be failure, okay? And we just need to create an environment wherein when you have that failure, you are not going to get injured, okay? So that you can, so that it is safe for you to fail. So when we're looking at how we set that up in practice, there's kind of two types of practice. When we go to a fighter practice and we're trying to get better at these things, right? And those things are what I refer to as deficiency practice or deficiency training. And that is where you are specifically doing, working on eliminating a deficiency in some way. And typically when you do that, you have to announce that to your opponent to let them know that you are working on a deficiency so that your opponent can help you with working on that deficiency. So that they can create situations that force you to exercise that tool that you were trying to get better at. Does it make sense? And so deficiency practice is, again, it's something where you have to communicate with your opponent to make sure that you are both on the same page. Because if one of you is doing deficiency training and one of you is doing sparring, well, the person that is trying to work on things that they're not very good at is going to have a higher fail rate. And if the other opponent is simply sparring, then that is going to result in injury. Not just losing fights, it is going to result in injury. And that is something we have to very specifically eliminate. We have to set up our practice in a way in which that is, we can eliminate that as much as possible. Does that make sense? So there's deficiency practice where you are this is a little bit different from training, right? Because you're creating an environment where you're actually fighting. It's going to be safe, full speed, full contact, possibly half speed if you guys agree on that. But it is a thing where you have to execute the skill set as best you can within a controlled environment. Okay, so you have deficiency training where you're working on the things, and then the other type of practice is sparring. Okay. One of the things that Bruce Lee talks about is the best exercise for the exercise is the exercise, right? There's a lot of there's conflicting theories about the difference between slow work and just getting an armor and just doing practice. Ultimately, you need to execute the skill set that you've been practicing, and you need to do that full speed, real time, as if it were a real combat environment, okay? And it's really important to be able to do this at practice, because one of the things about evaluation and tournament in particular is the tournament environment, and I'll cover this a little bit more in a minute, but the tournament environment comes with, again, a certain emotional baggage, because there's this desire to do well. And so if the only chance you have to execute your skill set at its full potential is, say, a crown tournament, crown tournament in particular comes with a whole cast of baggage that some of y'all in the room have dealt with. And if the only time that you have to execute your full skill set is in that environment, when dealing with those emotions, you're never able to execute that full skill set in and of itself. And so what we need to do is we need to execute that in an environment where we can remove the competitive component of fighting, and so you can just execute the skills. And the more you can execute those skills in a sparring environment, that puts you in a position to be able to execute that in tournament later. Because then there comes a point where you have exercised these things so well in a controlled environment that by the time you get into the tournament, you can deal with the emotional component of that by virtue of the fact that you have just increased your skill set at practice. Does that make sense? Right? So you have to have the sparring, because eventually at some point it's neat to work with theory and you gotta go through the steps to get better at these things, but at some point you just gotta grip it and rip it, right? And you just gotta execute it, and you have to find out whether or not you're gonna be able to execute the things you've been working on. And so as you've been doing training and you've been doing practice and deficiency practice, ideally what you're looking for is when you get to sparring, you hopefully want to be implementing some of the things that you've been working on for that efficiency training, and hopefully getting better at those things in a real-time environment. So any questions so far? We'll go through that, yes?
So when you're doing your physical practice, how do you let your opponent know?
You flat out tell them. And
I'm working on that.
one of the things that you can do to facilitate that, especially for the knights and the experienced fighters in the room, you can start practice with asking your opponent, what are you working on? Are you working on something in particular so I can help facilitate that efficiency training? Some of us that have a little more experience, I don't have to articulate it as much because I can gauge the level of opponent that I'm working with, and I can be working on my game. But I've got the experience as a trainer, as a student, as a fighter to be able, I can work on a thing. But it is critically important for newer fighters to be able to articulate that and to be able to ask for it. And we, especially as a chivalry, we need to be able to facilitate an environment where it is expected that the unbelted fighters are going to be comfortable saying, hey, I'm trying to work on this thing. One of the other things you can do is when you ask that question, you can start with, if they don't know what they want to work on, that is where you can do a quick evaluation. You do 3 fights with them, and then now you are in the training process. If they don't know what they need to be working on, you can do 3 fights with them. That's usually enough information for you to be able to have an evaluation so you can tell them what to work on. You can go through some quick training, walk them through a quick drill, walk them through some slow work, some walkthroughs, and then take that into that efficiency training and say, okay, now that we've showed you how to do this, now I'm going to be available to you to try to do these things, and then you get the sparring again after that. And so sparring kind of becomes that's your gift at the end, right? That's your cookie for doing all the other stuff, right? As you go through the training, you go through the deficiency training, and you work on the stuff, and then take a big deep breath, and then launch into it, and that's that time of practice where you get to actually just fight, right? And, you know, if somebody just wants to just go right into sparring, you know, that's fine too. But you can ask it in that way. You can say, are you working on something in particular, or do you just wanna go right into sparring? And see how they take that. Again, we as experienced fighters, we need to create an environment where young belted fighters and less experienced fighters of our community feel comfortable asking for that training, where that is more the default, where they know that they are expected more so to tell you what they want to work on, rather than the default being that they're just gonna fight, that they're just gonna jump right into sparring. Does that make sense? And that's one of the very small things we can do that is really ridiculously easy to do to create a training environment where people feel comfortable, less experienced fighters feel comfortable asserting that and getting what we as knights are there to do, because that is our job. And in fighter practice throughout the known world, this is where we've been doing it for just too many years. Put your armor on, go out and fight. That's it, right? So we have an obligation, we have an opportunity, and it's just ridiculously easy to do this. For us to just say, hey, what are you working on, right? Recently I was working with one of my squires, and lined up on against her, and she threw a shot at me that was just a shit show. There's just the one shot she threw, just basic textbook flat snap, and it was just a train wreck. And I'm like, I stepped back and I said, what the hell is that? And she said, well, I'm working on something. I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that. If you're working on something else, and that's the thing, is when you're working on a specific task and you're working on a specific technique, other parts of your skill set are going to suffer in their execution because you are focusing on the thing that you're working on, and that's okay. It's okay for you to have crappy mechanics if you're working on getting better footwork, right? Because you have to be able to focus on the thing that is most efficient and fix that, and that takes a certain amount of mental capacity to be able to focus on the thing you're trying to fix. And that means other things that you typically do correctly are going to suffer from that. And we have to know that that's okay. So when she started working on something, I'm like, that's fine, bro. You can throw all the crappy flat snaps at me if you want, as long as you're working on something. And because eventually, whatever it is you're working on is gonna get better. And it's gonna make you a better fighter. And so that's also kind of the point of redefining your victory conditions, right? Success, right? We all want to be successful, but having that victory condition means, that, like I said, body count is the most tangible measure of success that we have. But in my mind, the greater success on a day-to-day basis is progress. It's just being a better fighter today than you were last week. And that progress isn't necessarily measured in wins and losses. And so sometimes you have to look at the smaller successes, right? And you have to build on those smaller successes and realize that slow progress is still progress. Just to give you a quick example of what I mean by this, if you got somebody that is